So Reggie Fils-Aime was probably one of the most interesting Nintendo characters in recent memory because he was very loud. He was very boisterous. He was very in your face, which a lot of video game, presidents of companies don't really necessarily do. I remember when Reggie first came out on stage during E3 and he said, "I'm here to kick ass and take names." The crowd went wild. Everyone loved this very charismatic persona. Of course, Reggie Fils-Aime was the president of Nintendo of America for a very long time. He decided to step down, pursue some other ventures. He went into GameStop for a while, and I guess he didn't like it there, so he ended up leaving there, and now he's recently released a book. And so since he released a book, he's been sort of on this big media scrum lately, talking about both his book, talking about experiences working at Nintendo, and just a lot of interesting things. And since this media scrum has been happening, since his book has come out, there's been a lot of things where it's like I read about it online and I'm like, that wasn't really the case, Reggie. That's not quite the case that you're making it out to be. Now, of course, hindsight is always 20/20. We're talking about things from years and decades ago, so maybe, he forgot or told himself that one thing was one way and it really was another way, but I just find it interesting, a lot of the things he's been talking about, because it's like, well, maybe that was the case, but then you have all these other instances of questionable decisions that Nintendo made that you don't really comment on. So I kind of want to talk about this because it keeps popping up all over the place. It's like, Reggie hated this Nintendo game that everyone else hated. Reggie hated this handheld that everyone else hated. And it's like, okay, but what about all these other instances? What about all this other stuff? Now, one of the main things that a lot of people are talking about is Reggie, I guess, essentially throwing Doug Bowser under the bus for work conditions at Nintendo of America. He said something along the lines of, because there's been lots of allegations coming out about Nintendo of America recently. And he said, well, that wasn't happening under my regime. That's since I left. Since I left, obviously, I didn't leave that place like that. It must be the new people. And it's like, well, no, Reggie, there have been allegations about Nintendo of America when you were the president. I'm not saying that you necessarily knew about these. I'm not necessarily saying you turned a blind eye to them, but to say there were no allegations when you were there is preposterous, because you have the whole Katie Casper situation. This is something that went a bit under the radar for a lot of people. Katie Casper, of course, was a Nintendo of America employee. You saw her on Indie World presentations and whatnot when they used to have, on-screen people for that. And when Katie left Nintendo of America, she told a story on her blog post about some of her experiences there, and there was some negative stuff in there. There was some stuff that's like, yo, that shouldn't be happening in a workplace situation. Now, whether or not Reggie knew about these things, who's to say? It's going to be one person's story versus another person's story. But the fact of the matter is, people seem to have this notion that Nintendo of America is a place where you work at it and it's all sunshine and farts. Like Mario comes around and he's like, woohoo, let's talk, let's play video games. And, you go down a slide to get to the cafe to get your food. And it's like, no, it's corporate America. It's a corporation. You're sitting in a small cubicle with a picture of your wife on the wall, or your boyfriend, or whatever you got, your dog, your cat, whatever holds a special place in your heart, and you're sitting there working. You're doing stuff that is probably not fun stuff. Now, obviously, there's going to be a little bit more fun at Nintendo of America than, working at Subway or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's a corporation. It's a business. They are there to make money. So you can't really just paint this beautiful picture of working at Nintendo when there have been allegations that have come out over the years and over the past, decade plus, and just kind of ignore them. And that's kind of my whole thing with a lot of these video game companies. You hear something come out about Activision, you hear something come out about Ubisoft, and it's fun to dunk on them because they're the bad companies. They like microtransactions and loot boxes, and they want to charge you lots of money for stuff. But when it's a company that you like, such as Nintendo of America, you kind of just, oh, well, I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure, I'm goddamn sure that that's not happening there. And it's kind of like, it's a business. It's a corporation. It happens at every corporation. There are different levels to what happens there, but there's a lot of shitty stuff that happens at all corporations. But once again, I don't really necessarily blame Reggie for saying what he said. He's obviously trying to paint a positive picture of himself, but it is a bit hypocritical when there's literally documentation out there of people's stories of working at Nintendo of America with less than ideal situations, with things like harassment and stuff like that, shit that shouldn't fly in the workplace. But, you know, my main thing with this is this man is trying to sound like the savior of Nintendo of America with a lot of stuff. And kind of like I alluded to in the intro of this video, he's dunking on like specific games and specific things. Today I saw that he wasn't a fan of Donkey Konga. He pushed back hard against Nintendo. He said, I don't want to do Donkey Konga on the GameCube. No, sir. We don't need to do this. This is bad. The Game Boy Micro. I don't like the Game Boy Micro. A small Game Boy? No, this is stupid. I'm pushing back. I'm pushing back on it. And it's like, okay. Let's say you did push back on some of these things. Let's say you didn't want some of these games to happen. You let Nintendo of America during a time frame where a lot of games didn't get brought to the States because they weren't good enough. There wasn't a market for them. So for every Donkey Konga you talk about, for every, you know, let's say the Game Boy Micro, because that's another thing there, I could sit here and name games that didn't come here or should have came here, and it had literally had to be a grassroots movement in order to get the game here. Disaster Day of Crisis is definitely one that sticks out in my mind. This game came out in Japan. It also came out in the European regions, but it was deemed not good enough for North American gamers. Not good enough. We're not going to bring Disaster Day of Crisis over here. And honestly, it was one of the most interesting Wii games that ever came out, that I still haven't played this game, by the way. I still haven't played this game because of region locking during that time frame. Now, obviously, that's not a big marquee title or anything like that, but it's a game that, like, I would have liked to have played this game, but you didn't allow me to. Now let's talk about something that is a little bit more marquee. It's a little bit of a franchise that people have an absolute boner for, and they think it's one of the greatest RPG franchises of all time. Xenoblade Chronicles. Did you know, children, that Nintendo of America had no inclination to bring this game stateside? That game was not going to come onto the Wii in North America. It was a whole grassroots movement that started, that ended up getting enough steam to convince them to do a very limited run of the game, because it wasn't deemed something that North American audiences would be interested in. There were several games involved in that. I think it was The Last Story, Pandora's Tower, and Xenoblade Chronicles. And these three games, of course, you know, the aforementioned two games are definitely very popular Wii games, and Xenoblade Chronicles has ended up becoming a huge franchise for Nintendo, but it wasn't good enough. It wasn't quite good enough. You had to have a lot of convincing in order to bring that game over, Mr. Fils-Aime. Well, what's going on with that? Like, I guess hindsight is 2020, but I think the main thing is saying, you know, I didn't want Donkey Konga. I didn't want the Game Boy Micro. Those things stink. But Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival for the Nintendo Wii U, arguably the worst Nintendo published game of all time. I defy you to find a game that lacks quality in terms of a Nintendo developed and published game such as Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Nobody wanted that on the Wii U. Nobody asked for that game. If anything, they asked for an Animal Crossing game. But that system, the Wii U that was happening under your regime, didn't quite do that well. It didn't quite get the games. You know, supposedly there was all these partnerships, unprecedented relationship with third-party companies, and then no, it just didn't work out well. But at least you pushed back against Donkey Konga. At least you pushed back against the Game Boy Micro. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Do you see what I'm saying? Reggie Fils-Aime is a well-remembered person for Nintendo because of his charisma. Charisma will get you much further in life than I think a lot of people understand. You know, charisma is probably one of the most important things, a stage presence, an ability to talk to people. I mean, look at this channel. Like, I'm not doing anything that a lot of people can't do, and a lot of people don't do better than me, but a lot of people don't sort of have my charisma. They don't have, you know, my sort of presence when I talk to people, and I understand that that's my strong point. It's not editing. It's not, you know, and making a fancy looking video around that. I get by on personality, and Reggie Fils-Aime is definitely a person who got by on personality. But I just find it really weird how everyone's kind of celebrating him right now and, you know, giving him his flowers, when realistically there were times where it was like, you know, okay, Reggie, this is a bad decision. Okay, Reggie, this is you shouldn't do this, or you should do this. Why aren't you doing this? So I guess I say all that to say hindsight is 2020. The corporate world is the corporate world, and until there's a major shift in it, there's always going to be instances of harassment and, you know, stuff that happens in the workplace that definitely shouldn't happen. And Reggie is trying to sell you his book. He's trying to look like the best individual that he can because he wants you to buy his book to read his side of things when working at Nintendo of America. But when I see things like, you know, I pushed back against this game, I didn't like this system, but then you did things such as not wanting to bring certain games to the Wii and didn't bring certain games to the Wii, and you thought Amiibo Festival was a good idea, it's kind of like, it's business talk. You know, it's business. It's business at the end of the day. I respect Reggie Fils-Aime for everything that he did and honestly didn't do for Nintendo of America. He was a very charismatic person. Think of how often Reggie talked versus how often Doug Bowser talks. You know, it's a different type of president. It's a different type of person. And I feel like Reggie gave us years and years of entertainment, but it wasn't always good years of entertainment. I guess that's kind of the thing I'm getting at here. You know, check out his book, buy his book, you know, read his side of things with the story, but also keep in mind when reading this book, he's obviously trying to make himself look as good as humanly possible, as anyone would do. I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. I don't know. I just wanted to talk about it because I keep seeing these stories about Reggie pop up in 2022, and I'm like, when does this dude leave the video game industry? Like, why are we talking about the past? Let's talk about the present. Let's talk about the future of games instead of talking about a person who was essentially a speakerhead for Nintendo of America that also, you know, try to not bring certain games over here, but he's trying to paint himself as like the god of video games or something, which, I mean, you need to do. You need to do things like that. You need to make yourself look as good as possible so that you can come out smelling like roses and get those sweet, sweet book sales. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel and you're not mad at me for, you know, going against the grain and talking about your love of Reggie, you know, hit that subscribe button, like and share the video around. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.